I'm stuck in survival mode right now versus thrival mode.
Expo to the extreme. Is
Expo
that
of the extreme.
Expo of the extreme? Is this your first event you had put on?
No, the first. Are we recording?
We sure are.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should never ask that. I should know better. Why do I
It's
ask
okay.
it? It'll be like the beginning of every show. Are we recording? Like I'm old grandpa. Hey, are we recording? Of course we are.
This podcast is based around the history and experiences of the infamous Shane Bugbee, recollected and retold by Shane Bugbee himself. Who is Shane? Well, you're about to find out. I'm your host, Nannerl, and this is Speak of the Devil.
So yeah, no, it's not the first thing I ever did. The first thing I ever did was a charity event to raise food and clothing for homeless people, and I put all these metal bands on the stage. It was a suburban event. It was funny. It was suburban metal bands at Chances Are in Palatine, Illinois. And I remember Aftermath played, and these bands played, and the venue said, "We're going to give you a shot, kid. You've never promoted a show before. You know, there'll be, if there's no one here, you know, I lose money. I got to sell beer. I've got to sell beer. And so I'm on the hook this much money if I don't sell beer." And the place was packed. It was wonderful. I got drunk, and I remember the guy counting out the money afterwards, and it was just great stack of money, you know, and they all went to charity. So it was really neat. It was fulfilling. And before the event, there was ads being run on cable from, they just took it as a nonprofit thing. So it was cool. It was neat to be seen.
It's interesting that a lot of venues will support or allow events to take place half the time as long as they sell beer, as long as they fill the seats, as long as the rent is paid. They don't necessarily endorse or condone what you're doing, but you are helping them pay the rent. It's an interesting symbiotic relationship that venue providers often have.
Yeah, and a lot of times when they don't believe in you, they make you're on the hook for the, listen, if we don't bring in $1,000 in beer, you've got to pay for the extra. And I remember that happening at an event I did. I did the last, it was supposed to be the last event at the Chicago club called the Exit, and it was a metal show. And at the end of the day, they kept the door money, the $800 in door money, because we didn't make the beer tab, you know, what they'd normally make. And I'm like, well, then I get to leave with $800 in alcohol. That's the logic on my part. Then give me $800 in beer. And they're like, no, it doesn't work that way. And I go, yeah, actually it does. Why? You know, but it was such a ripoff. It was such a ripoff. What a scam. You know, they venues often set that stuff up where they're the only winners in the game. You know, you can't win.
No, but on another hand, do you ever feel like it's also at least you got to put on your event, or do you sometimes feel as if it was a complete waste?
Interesting. Younger, of course, like younger, you fall for the exposure thing. You're like, yeah, great. I did. Look at me. I'm a cool guy. I did something at the Exit. Look at me. It's ego. Older, you're like, yeah, fuck that shit, man. I want money because I can bring people in here.
I could have stayed home and taken a nap.
Right. I want a guarantee. I want money. And so it depends. And it also, for me, most of my work is political, or it's in the heart. So it's not money driven. So a lot of my stuff, I certainly do feel lucky to have a venue and be in there, and I just want to do this event because I think it's important. Maybe it's a learning event. I feel like it's going to teach people, or it's going to inspire people. You know, influence. I think artwork has immense influence and inspiration, and so I do things for those reasons. Like I really believe in the stuff I'm presenting, or I'm celebrating my culture as a metalhead, let's say, or an artist, or poetry. So I feel it's important to put that stuff out there. That's how I participate in the human cause. you know, I don't just take, I give back. As an artist are generous, as you well know. You're an artist, and we're very generous as to what we give. And I think for me, that's the nature of promoting and doing shows, is to be generous. It's not about making money, though I try to put that hat on as a business person, you know.
Have you ever had an event that you put on and the venue people just straight up said, no, you can't do that, and you had to find somewhere else?
Oh, yeah, Angry White Male Tour. Oops, I forgot about that one. Yeah, the Angry White Male Tour was a pretty intense thing. When we got to, where was it? We were heading down from Las Vegas to either Arizona or New Mexico, and a venue there canceled, and it was a mayor or someone like that canceled it. The city gave them grief. And I was like, fuck it, let's go down there and do this event anyway, right on the street. Like, we'll do it right in front of the city hall. But you're with a whole troop of people. We're with 3 van loads of people. And so the voting got intense, and I remember that's where we lost. I hate this guy too, Jim Goad. Like, he left the tour at that point. We got in a fight, almost a physical fight. It was funny. He said, because we're getting pushing each other, like, I'll fucking kick your ass. And he goes, if I weren't on parole, I would knock your block off. And he said it like that, knock your block off. So I started laughing my head off. I'm like, knock my block off.
Who says
Dude,
that?
I said, I have no problem fighting you at this point. You just said knock your block off. Like, fuck you, Popeye. You know?
Straight to the moon. One of these days.
Right. So, but that we decided to cancel that show. Oh yeah, I've had a lot of instances like that. I can't think of them all, but certainly that's been a battle with obscene artwork and the controversial nature of what I've done.
What is the Angry White Male Tour?
Well, it was just a way to promote books that I was putting out at the way. You know, it was a way to bring out for me, before the internet, and that was right at the beginning of the internet. There was some internet happening.
Right?
The years I will never remember. So I'm guessing you've done your research, but I just know that when we did, I put out a book, Worst a Boiled Angel by Mike Diana, and I put out the rape issue from Jim Goad, Answer Me. And I was working with the Boone brothers who did Brawlin' Broads. So I was working with all these components. I had a bunch of books I just put out, and I needed to pay the bills. And so I just had obtained the Edward Gein tombstone. I don't want to say I stole it or took it. So I obtained it. So I had that, and I was like, I'll take it. And so we took the Gein stone on tour, and it was so heavy, 4 men couldn't lift it. 4 strong folks couldn't lift it. So I had to have the Gein stone cut in half from the bottom. And so, yeah, right. So I cut it in half, and we could finally lift it. And so I brought that on tour as part of the publicity, you know, to get publicity for my books. Because, you know, as an underground publisher, you can't afford to pay for advertising. And you know what? There's nothing like editorial advertising to sell your books. And so the Gein Stone, Jim Goad. So we went out and Jim would do some songs, and he'd do some it was more like artists doing spoken word or speaking. Mike Diana would draw live on stage while a band played. The Brawlin' Broads would come out there and introduce people. We had a guy named Skitzo touring with us, and he was in a band where he would be able to vomit on command. And so he'd vomit on canvases. So it was like mocking the art world. And it was sort of fun. It was fun because I'd go to bookstores. I remember going to Portland, and they're like, well, we don't want to take your book. We don't know if we can take your books. And I'm like, this is Skitzo. He vomits on command. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, he's starting to feel sick. And he's like, whoa, whoa. I might vomit all over these books. And I'm like, okay, we'll take a dozen of each. It was almost like strong-arming people. And in Seattle, this one bookstore was like, they gave us grief, and I don't know what they did, but he went out and he vomited all over the front of their store. So it was a really obscene, fucked up, angry, you know, but it was fun. We had fun. Oh yeah. The guy from the Mentors joined us, trigger warnings all day long on this show. Okay. Sickie Wife Beater joined us from the Mentors rock band in Seattle. He drove down to Portland with us, and it was, we stayed with the Mentors in Seattle. So, you know, that's where I come from, kids. Yes, we stayed with the Rape Rockers, the Mentors. And I, at this point, I want to, I just want to say trigger warnings, or I apologize for.
Trigger warning, Shane is gross.
Yeah, well, I don't do that. I'm not in. I don't know what to say. It's
No,
just my.
Shane was gross. Nannerl's pretty gross, though.
But I remember we did it. We did it as a thing to mock. It was so to explain that name. It wasn't to say we are angry white males, but it was mocking the Republican establishment that was in office at that time, or it was mocking, like, it was mockery of that. And I think Clinton was in office, and I was like,
Yes.
boy, if the Republicans were in office, our tour would be packed, because it would be controversial to Republicans. So it would hit but because the Democrats were in office, what we were doing wasn't controversial. It was just like, big deal, who cares? But the Republicans find controversy in art and expression and stuff like that. So I was going after Republicans with that stuff. You know, that's the way it was, you know.
I think of what was on TV during 2001, and that time period is. Let's see. Oh no, I think W was in, because 9/11 was 2001.
Was it?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I just remember that there was
W
this.
was president. However, that time period of the cusp after, because W was president 2000.
Huh.
And I do think that entertainment during the late Clinton years into 9/11, there was a lot of things on TV that sort of desensitized us at that point. You know, Marilyn Manson had come out with his Hollywood album reflecting on Columbine and other things that were dark in his life. The Bloodhound Gang had their videos up, and they were a little bit shocking for suburbia. There were a lot of movies like Mulholland Drive and Lost Highway were out, and all these things that were. Oh, South Park. South Park was a household name by that point. And so I think that to go on a tour to do so, I think that the oversaturation on television may have worked to a disadvantage by 2001.
That's possible. I don't remember the time frame. I do remember, I thought, see, my memory's so fried, a quote in Spin magazine, because we got like a 16-page spread on the Angry White Male tour.
Oh, good job. That's
Yeah.
something, though. Spin magazine was a thing,
It was.
especially at late 90s, early 2000s.
And it was a big deal. It was a big deal. And so in that, I thought there was a quote in there where it says something about the Democrats being in office or in charge, and that's why it wasn't as heavily attended. But my memory's so off. I wish I had that in front of me. You know, it's such a blur, these events that I did.
Let's start from the beginning. Expo to the Extreme. What is Expo to the Extreme, and what is extreme according to this festival?
Oh boy. So, well, I used to work at the Milwaukee Metal Fest, and I helped book the Milwaukee Metal Fest for years. And then I had a falling out with the gentleman who ran it, because he started doing pay to play. And it started to become crap. And a lot of my friends were upset, because they're like, we came all the way up here, spent all this money, and we're getting 4 minutes on stage, because he packed the bill with so many bands just to sell tickets. And so I went and did my own event called Expo the Extreme. And so it was a 3-day event with, I think, 60 bands or something like that. It was one of the first times black metal came to the United States. I always thought it was the first time, but someone had said a year prior, a black metal band came to New York. So I had like a Mortis and Dark Funeral, and they were the start. But my idea was to bring counterculture in. So I had Mike Diana was there. I had zine people there. I had the zine culture there. And then I had porn culture there and S&M culture. And so that was the extreme part back in the day. That was like weird to mix music and porn. and all these counterculture things, really angry stuff. One thing I remember off the top of my head is at the end of the show, there's so many about that. That was the out of body experience. It was so hard. But after the show, I went to the venue to pick up some stuff. And one of the people who managed the venue pulled me aside and said, why would you do such a horrible event? I mean, these people were damaged people that you're catering to. They're cutting themselves, they're killing live chickens live on the stage. How could you enable that? He was really upset by what we did. And I was like, wow, I just saw it as for me, an underground artist, that's what I've seen on stage plenty. I've seen this stuff plenty. So to bring it to an actual legitimate theater and have the theater person who's running the theater be so disturbed, they were physically disturbed, and we had no business at that point. He took me aside to ask me questions because he was so disturbed by it. And at that point, I was like, wow, we are a class of people, a subculture that is disturbed, and that's part of, I believe, part of what I tried to present in my own artwork is the pain that I went through as a child. And so I think we all united on that kind of stuff. We were all like, I think Slayer said it once, if you're not fucked up and have a lot of issues, you'll never understand our music. And so that's how I left that venue that day going, wow, that guy is not from the fucked up zip code.
Was he an older person?
No, he wasn't. He was maybe a couple years older than me, but not much. He was young. He was a young guy. He was probably from affluence, an educated person who saw a lot of troubled people, a lot of people who had been victimized. And back in the day when you wore tattoos, it was to scare people away.
Yes.
So they're all tattooed, pierced. This was not pop.
Colored hair was not mainstream either.
Right,
It was
right.
still wild to have blue hair in 1999, 1997.
Right. So we had people with piercings in their nose, big piercings. All that stuff was so underground. It was scary to people.
There was a separation of counterculture, especially alternative counterculture, from mainstream culture. It was still rock versus rap at that ass end of the Clinton years, the ass end of the 90s. You're also talking about the time period that there was a lot of embracing in music and culture that was alternative, of embracing that you are a disturbed person. You are mental. The word mental was a thing. And it hasn't been in almost 20 years now. But I think of stuff like being mental, being twisted, being disturbed, all these MTV buzzwords that showed up a couple years later.
Oh my God, I just think right away, and I'm so dated. Fuck off, kids. Have you ever heard of Quiet Riot, kids? But I think
Come
of that.
on! Feel the noise!
Yeah, but mental health will set you. Mental health. It was the name of their album, Mental Health, and they had a guy in a straitjacket on the cover. Or Anthrax is. Oh God, what was that? Anthrax has a great mental health song. I forget the name of it now.
I think of Suicidal Tendencies.
It's a Madhouse. Oh yeah, Suicidal Tendencies was my favorite. Anthrax is It's a Madhouse. Dun, 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 dun,
Yes.
dun, dun. Oh, so they say. Or Suicidal Tendencies was one of the first bands I ever.
Institutionalized.
Oh,
so
God.
relatable to middle class and poor kids. Like, such an anthem.
Yeah, that was the first cassette I ever bought, and I bought it through the mail after reading about it in Thrasher magazine. It was a skater cassette, and I got it right from Mike Muir's brother.
Nice.
Like handwritten. His brother ran the mail order, I guess, and wrote a note. It was like, oh, that changed my life. Someone thought like me.
That time period, parents just don't understand. Right. And, your parents thought you were on drugs or in a cult if you weren't a football player or a cheerleader. Keep in mind, I experienced the end of that. It sort of, do you know what that stereotype sort of started? Let me emphasize, it didn't stop while I was still in high school, but it started to decay at Columbine. Columbine started to kill that, but because that was sort of the breaking point of that in is it 98 or
Interesting.
99?
Interesting observation. Wow.
But that deep separation, I remember there was a rivalry at my middle school in 8th grade of, get ready for this, the skaters versus the stoners. And
Oh,
remember, this is the generation of all of the very mainstream skateboard companies with more cleaned up versions of your generation's street art. It started
right.
to become cool. PacSun
Right.
started carrying skateboarding clothing. And so the pipe pants, the wide-legged pants and the bowl cut on boys with the large t-shirts was the in thing. And so the cool rich kids were the skaters suddenly. It wasn't the hesher kids. It wasn't the weird kids or whatever. It wasn't so underground at that point. It was a weird break in time, and it's interesting that all of those kids ended up playing football the next year. And the stoner kids were all the poor hesher kids. The kids I hung out with, and, still to this day, we're all still friends. But I remember there was an asthmatic kid who was one of the hesher kids, and he got in a physical fight with a group of those brats, the privileged kids. And as a group, them versus one kid beat the shit out of him. And he had an asthma attack, and he nearly died.
Wow.
And he got in trouble, and those other boys did not get suspended because it was off of school grounds or whatever. Meanwhile, my friends and I got in hot water because of Columbine and looking the part. And so that time period of, again, because if you didn't fit in with that in crowd of those skaters and you were part of the stoners or whatever the fuck your crowd was called, then you must be on drugs. You must be a problem. Look at the other example I wanted to point out quickly is Sally Jesse Raphael, Ricky Lake. All of these talk shows with the goth kid, the very Marilyn Manson looking kids with their lunchboxes on television, and their parents call them a pussy or whatever. Remember the kid? He looked uncanny clone to like a 10 years younger Marilyn Manson. His name was like Alan Jr. or something like that. And he had the jock dad. He was like from like Boston or Jersey or something like that. And his dad looked like he listened to Springsteen. And he seemed like a nice kid, and his dad had a problem with him. But even Ricky Lake seemed cool with him. Funny story, I actually sent him a message one time on YouTube because he had those clips on his YouTube, and I mentioned to him how I remember him on TV, and I remember feeling very empowered by him. And I remember he wrote back, and that was very nice. Shout out to Alan Jr. I think you're still cool, whatever you're doing.
Neat. That's a great story. The only thing I could think of is when I was younger, it was freaks and jocks.
Like the Freaks and Geeks show.
Okay, so
the
we
jocks
didn't
and
have
the freaks though.
So you're West Coast. We didn't have skater culture in the Midwest. We didn't have it.
Fair.
So I just know that, and I'm older, so I don't know, maybe it evolved. Maybe we did have skating at some point, but when I grew up, skating was very, very new. I saw the birth of Thrasher magazine, the first one, so it was very new. We had freaks, and the freaks were long hairs, and they smoked pot. They did drugs, and then there was jocks, short haired, and they didn't do drugs. And then there was frocks, and the frocks were jocks who hung out with the freaks, would smoke weed but still be in the sports. They were sort of, the frocks were the balanced ones. And that's how we had it. And I played football when I was a young boy, and I was big, and I was great. I was good, really dominant in football, but I didn't grow any further. So in high school, I tried to play football in freshman year and got savaged, like just smashed. And so I joined the frocks. I mean the freaks. I just sort of gravitated towards that end of things, the troubled. At that point, my parents had heavy trouble, and it reflected. And so I eventually dropped out, but all these things.
I think that my crowd was sort of equivalent to the freaks, and I feel like I gravitated toward that clique, not because I was sort of not from the same family dynamics, but it was the only people at school who seemed to not question every little move I made. Whereas I felt second guessed, and I felt like every move I made, everything I said was always questioned for a myriad of reasons. So I'm not surprised about Expo to the Extreme being a mirror to society at that point. I feel like your event showed a mirror, and the venue owner did not like what he saw.
Right, and most of the work I've published of other artists or presented is always really heavy, ugly, hard stuff that I don't see being presented anywhere. But that's what's going on in where I grew up. That's what's going on outside my window. And like I said in the Mike Diana episode to that newspaper person, if you want to see beautiful artwork, make the world a beautiful place. This is what we see. That's why we reflect it back at you, you know. And so being part of that aesthetic terrorism group or whatever it is, the art that kills movement, we wanted to hurt people's feelings. We wanted to hurt people that weren't paying attention to us.
When I think of something like Court of Porn, I think of prom court, and everyone's fucking each other on the stage, and they haven't even announced who's the king or queen.
That's a fair assessment of that event. That's a fair assessment of that event.
Was it porn court? Was it court? Porn prom?
It was an art show, and it was that's you.
Gesundheit.
Thank you. It was an art show where I presented erotic artwork. Let me just put it this way. I presented underground comics that dealt with sex. So it was a lot of transsexual comics. It was really, and back then it was heavy. It was like, wow, this is the fringe of the set of set. I call it erotica versus porn because it was true expression. I think porn is more exploitive. So the fringe of erotica in that day was like trans and BDSM and stuff like that. And so I presented that in an art. This was an art show, but I didn't present it in a gallery. And I also invited porn stars, strippers, BDSM people to participate. And they were such a subculture at that time. Yes. I mean, really underground. It was illegal. It was BDSM clubs were raided. And so it was heavy. So they were welcome to participate, to say, hey, we're just like everyone else. Thanks for the invite. So we had people getting beaten on stage, flogged. We had the naked guy. This guy, he had a big beer belly, and he wasn't great looking, but he was naked, and he would, oh my God, the first one of the quarter porns, he got up on the stage and he masturbated. He masturbated like 7 different times and had orgasms. And so we have artwork on the wall. We have strippers going crazy, and it was just great. The first one we did in a basement, and I invited Seka, the porn star. Now, so she comes to the event. Oh, what a dream it was to work with her. I don't know if I've admitted this before, but that was how I lost my masturbatory virginity, was to a Seka video. So to knock on her door as an adult, she lived in Chicago, and to knock on her door as an adult, I'm like, oh my God, I felt like such a kid. My palms are sweating. And she answers the door. Her hair's all messed up. She had a rough night. She's smoking a cigar too. I've never seen a lady smoke a big fat cigar. She's like, come on in, kid. And I'm like, very different than the porn star that I'd seen. But she comes to the event.
Your heroes.
Oh boy, it was wonderful. It was wonderful, but so different and twisted. What a learning experience, right? So she came to the first one, and the first one was just fucking epic underground at the Poop Studio Goat Gallery, where we were under the ground, under the Flatiron Building in Chicago. And there's a line out the door. I mean, it's popular. And so we have cheesecake delivered, to feed to people, art show. And she signs autographs, and we did a screen print of her so she could sign it. And we had Fisto the clown there. And the one memory I remember at the end, it just devolved into fucking debauchery, man. People fucking everywhere. It was just like amazing. But then there's art hanging of people fucking. So there's people like having oral sex, men and women just going at it like underneath the artwork. So it's like the art came to life. It was beautiful to me. And then I remember there was this guy just on the laying in this corner, and there's all these beers spilled, and is in a puddle, and he's just like all laying in all this swill, and he's like, step on my balls, step on my balls. And these girls are like stepping on his balls with their high heels and stuff. And I'm like, I've never seen anything like that. And as a person who has balls and an excellent imagination, I cannot imagine living through something like that. They were standing on his testicles. And so that was the first court of porn. We did 3, and one of them evolved into the Congress Theater, where we did it on live stage, and people were getting, there was a bondage, a dominatrix who was electrocuting someone's balls on stage. So we did it, but the cops came in and closed it down. It was intense.
I'm familiar with the evolution of these kind of events. It's interesting to hear about an uncut, like basically the statement before the rules had to lay down. You think of bondage ball and fetish ball and all these other fetish clubs in Florida and Los Angeles, where there's very similar activities, but it's not as squishy because of, health code. But also, certain forms of expression are allowed to be exhibited, and there's certain fetish shows allowed, but others of it had to be cut out. And it's far more mainstream than the event that you put down. So I really appreciate kind of hearing more of an origin to something that I used to enjoy attending. It's neat. It's very neat. I really like that.
Oh, this was the first thing of its kind in Chicago. And it's okay. So it grew. So that was the first one. Then the second one, we did at a gallery. And it was really cool and happened. And that's where the masturbating guy came in. The third one, we were doing at that gallery again. And we got tipped off from the bondage club. They had cops that told them, hey, they're going to be raided because it was a political year. So the guy that owned the gallery would sit there in his chair, and he would hand out flyers to people in the know where the event moved, because we moved it to the Congress Theater where we did the Expo. And then the TV crews and all that stuff came in with the police and the fire department. He's sitting there by himself.
Nice.
And they're like, where is it? And so they eventually found where we were. And I'm there, and at the Expo the Extreme, the cops came in too. But all these lawyers showed up, and they're like, Shane, we love, and I don't know who they are, never met them before. And they're like, we love what you do. We're here to protect you. And they're lawyers. They're like, we're from the Lawyers Guild. We're this. They hand me their cards. And so at the court of porn, all these cops come in, and they try to raid it. And the third one was I got involved with the porn business, and they had, oh God, this is bringing this into the Midwest. So they brought the gangbang bus out from the West Coast, which was the 500-person Houston 500 gangbang, to promote it. And they have all these porn stars in it. And they're driving around Chicago with this big bus. And on the side of it, it says, world's largest gangbang. And they're driving through the Midwest with this and through Chicago. And so it infuriated the politicos.
Nothing's excited people since the Weenie Mobile went into town.
Right. Oh God, you're funny. So what they do, Milwaukee Avenue is a huge street, a cut-through street in Chicago. They close off the street in front of the venue for a block, and people are jumping fences. They're like, the venue's packed, the police are there, and the lawyers are like, you have to leave. And the lawyers tell me, make sure, no matter what, all the people there that are being naked, make sure they all say, we're not being paid to be here. And I say, why? And they said, because it's legal for adults to gather and be naked. It is not legal for you to pay them to be naked, and it is not legal for them to be paid to be naked. And I said, great. So we all come to this agreement. We're naked for ourselves.
It's a hot
There's
day.
no payment. Yeah, there's no payment involved. We're all adults. And so they push the cops out of there. And so it's like a battle. The cops rush in, try to shut down the venue, and they get pushed out by these lawyers. Then about a half hour later, the white shirts come in, which are cops in white shirts with stripes that know how to read the law and know the loopholes in the law. And oh God, this was so wild. We had cops protecting the front door and bikers protecting the back door. And oh God, it's so intense, out of body experience, like with the Expo. It was so hard to do with no money. And so, and I'll tell you about that business part in a second. But the white shirts come in and they go, okay, you got us here, don't you? And they leave. And next thing you know, 15 minutes later, the IRS comes in.
It's a
And they're like,
clown car. It just
right,
doesn't stop.
clown car, that's awesome. Right. So they come in, the IRS comes in and starts going, let me see your license. And we had vendors there and all this. So all store owners that sold tickets got harassed, and anyone who was there got harassed based on taxes. And so I couldn't pay the police that were at the front door. And I'm like, hey, can I pay you guys another week? And they're like, no, you pay us now. And I'm like, but I don't have the money. And they go, you don't seem to understand something. If you pay us, you make it to your car. And I'm like, oh God, that was the police that were off-duty police officers that were security. So I had to go around and ask all the vendors, could you please borrow me $50? Could you? And I had to go around and ask money from vendors. And I had to tell them the police told me this. And so everyone gathered up the money, and I was able to pay the off-duty police officers to leave without incident to me. And yeah, went in debt over all these events. The Expo, the Extreme was the same thing. The police came in and harassed it, and you have to make payoffs and all this weird shit. And if you're not a promoter in Chicago to promote an event, you're stepping on people's toes. So they send their friends in, the police, to come and get you. Chicago sucks for that kind of stuff.
Activity.
Absolutely.
That was like shutting down a casino game kind of thing.
Absolutely.
But that was a lot of people. That wasn't like, 12 people and 5 hookers kind of event.
No, it was a lot of people, and there was a lot of police there, and they shut down a major city street, which I felt like at the day, from a kid who lived in his car, what an accomplishment.
No, that's an accomplishment. And look at events that go on now that are enormous, and they have a lot of debauchery. The only other events with that much debauchery at that time period that I think of are like the fire at Woodstock 96, where everyone started rioting, and Freaknik in like Atlanta.
Okay. I don't know about
Freaknik
I don't remember.
Is a hip-hop music festival, and when you look it up, you see a lot of asses shaking in front of cars.
Oh, right. Okay, now I know what it is. I remember. Well, yeah, this was a whole different thing. Yeah, it was different than that, both those events, because it was this angry underground subcultures, bondage subculture, all that stuff. And it definitely was, we did definitely blaze trails for things like the Riot Fest in Chicago that goes on now was directly influenced by the Expo the Extreme, and they're a multi-million-dollar festival. And so it is weird to look back and do these events based on love, based on the love of the culture, based on thinking we're not doing anything wrong here, and we're going to present it that way. We're going to present ourselves as honest. This is what we are. We shouldn't have to hide in the closet. And to do that, and then to see how it is evolved, makes me happy, yet also perplexed as to how do I make money on this now? Or how can I, and sometimes I feel like back in the day, we gave people too much. The events that we did we gave people too much, and they didn't appreciate it.
No one ever does until they look at it through history. I didn't know anything about these events until you've told me about them. And they do run into my culture. My early 20s events that I used to enjoy going to, they would never have existed if something like this hadn't happened.
Right. Now that's the truth.
A lot of rules, such as like, being nude and saying that you're not paid to be here, I've heard those rules. And it's interesting that you're saying that about that. I can't help but compare how you must feel about these enormous events put on that wouldn't be there without your events that you gave so much to. I can't help but compare it to raves in Southern California that you had to dial a phone number at the last minute to see where to go. And then, compared to EDC, that's now in Las Vegas, the Electric Daisy Carnival. that happens every summer. That used to be cheap as fuck to go to in San Bernardino. I mean, I'm old enough that my partner went to it when it used to be in San Bernardino. It didn't cost shit to go to, and now it's this enormous festival that everyone goes to the point that you're a loser if you don't go to it. Whereas no one knew what EDC was when we were in high school. No one knew what the fuck drum and bass music was or any other rave music. And it's sort of the same, like Insomnia events, the people who run that, a lot of them come from, day one, the underground, etc. But there's others who sort of either grew out of it, moved on, or just were kind of forgotten about. And now look at, Skrillex is selling out concerts, etc. He wasn't there. He wasn't there from day one.
And all of these events were done by a very few amount of people, like 3 or 4 people, and we just were dedicated to it. We gave everything to do this. I mean, we gave it our all. Every hour of the day, we just really did it. And I remember wearing holes in my shoes, putting up posters for the Expo the Extreme. And I remember, on the first Expo the Extreme, the band Trouble, this Chicago band, they played and their manager was there yelling at us because we couldn't pay them. We couldn't pay bands at the Expo the Extreme. And there was bands like, how the fuck you not paying me? Well, there's no money here. Then no one showed up. And the guy's yelling at me. And I'm like, then he said something about, well, what have you even done? And I'm like, it snapped in. I'm like, motherfucker, I put up thousands of posters. I wore holes in my shoes. This event has been it had a full page in the Tribune, like a write-up. The Sun-Times wrote it up. I did my job as a promoter. Every media source in Chicago talked about my show. They were talking about us being dangerous, all that stuff. So I said, at this point, I did my job. You mean your band didn't draw? And I was able to flip it around on them because as a promoter of all these events, we really worked hard. We went to every nook and cranny. We just really, and a lot of times we would go to like plumbing supply warehouse. That's where we put flyers. We didn't just put them at record stores. We'd go to buy, where are the carpenters buying their wood? And we'd go there and put down flyers, because we wanted to reach the common person, not just the event, the people who deem an event successful or not.
Your flyer is going to be lost at a record store.
Right.
You come across it getting something for your dad or whoever at the the hardware store. You're going to remember that flyer.
Right. And that's how I looked at it as a promoter. I remember that 666 Eve, promoted that from the middle of the North Woods of Minnesota. Like I was in the woods doing an event in Los Angeles and promoted it and made a newspaper for it and fucking packed.
And this is when you were still in Ely, Minnesota, like we talked about mid-season 1.
Yeah.
Did anyone else help promote this event?
Some people from Los Angeles that were into it. Like some of the bands that were playing, they went and I printed a newspaper. Back then, pre-internet marketing, you still did flyers and stuff like that. And I chose to do newspapers. Newsprint was just as cheap as a postcard almost. So we made our editorial and we put out this cool newspaper. And with all my events, we did newspapers, Court of Porn, Expo the Extreme. And so we printed it in Los Angeles. And people from Los Angeles, the bands, and some of the people who were into what I did at the time went and picked up bundles of newspapers and distributed them out throughout LA. And man, that event was popping. I loved it. That was a good fucking time.
Now this one's in 2006, and you're actually getting into the same time period that I was in LA. I was an adult at this point. I was 21 in LA in 2006, and it still baffles me that we never crossed paths, because when I watched the footage of 666 Eve, I saw some people in dancing in the background, having a good time that I have seen at events and clubs that I used to go to. I didn't know those people, but it was the same folks. And so I'm still amazed that I don't recall. I sort of recall hearing about it, but I was so involved in going to where I was going with my friends and doing what I was doing with my friends. Plus, I was struggling to pay for school. And so I'm sort of surprised I never went to it.
I was told from people who are from LA that it was a real uphill battle because of the neighborhood it was in. No one goes there to go out. No one's
No,
going to go
Zen
to it.
Sushi was a pain in the ass to get to, and I got lost every time I went, and then you had to park on that really, really, really steep hill. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do. I was
And like
there. Yeah.
the most uppity people live on that hill.
I didn't know that,
Shout
but I
out
know
to
that.
Silver Lake uppity folk who live on that
Yeah.
hill next to where Zen Sushi was.
I do realize it now, but I didn't know. I said, fuck it. I don't care. We have an event. It's cool. We're doing it. And it was packed. And I remember the one thing, it was like, you know, that was an event that I broke even on. It was good because it paid for my travel out there and everything. Left, you know, was able to pay for some meals. So it was a good event. But the reason that it was break even was the Omen remake of the movie.
Yes.
They came in and paid to be a part of it. And they're like, can we stand outside with signs? And I'm like, absolutely not unless you pay. So they like wrote out a check right there for $1,000. And these actors with black makeup stood outside with Omen signs. And then they're like, can we come inside and put flyers? I'm like, no, not without money. So she wrote another check for $1,000 and came in and bought a cake for me. Happy 666 Eve. This huge cake, which we brought up on stage and smashed over each other. And this bloody burlesque dancer, all bloody with topless. She was smashing cake on me. Oh, it was so wonderful.
Alas, we've come full circle with the cake and boobies.
Oh, it was cake and boobies. And she smashed it all over me and rubbed her boobies in my face. And it was just wonderful. And we had porn stars there. And it was just a really fun event for everyone who was there. I mean, if that sounds shocking or triggers you out, I'm sorry. But it was fun. Everyone that there really enjoyed themselves. And so that's what I take as a successful event, not the monetary issue at the door. It was that people were really going off and having fun. Like there was a porn filmed in the bathroom. I mean, it was the bondage girls had a great time performing because the crowd was so receptive, and they had the fake blood. I forget this. I forget the name of the bondage troupe, but the fake blood was poured all over them, and oh, it was so fucking cool. It was so cool. I loved it, and to be on stage and leave the stage with cake just all over my body just was wonderful. It was wonderful.
How did it feel to come full circle from Expo to the Extreme and Court of Porn and sort of have a very different flair of something you started at one point, but now here you are putting on an event, you know, almost 10 years later in a very smoke and mirrors city. And then, you know, this movie, you know, people tied in with the movie The Omen wanted to participate and they paid you to promote so they could promote there. That's I hate this cliche, but I've said it so much about my own life too. That's so LA.
Well, how does it feel now and how did it feel then? How it felt then was it was just another moment in my life. Like I just started a soda company. So I did things now that people will tell me, well, hey, that's a big deal. Wow, you really did things. But it was just part of my being and forward momentum. I didn't really, at that time, to be honest with you, most of the stuff I did, I felt invisible to the public and very small. And so I didn't take any, it was just another thing to try to be seen or try to compensate for something my parents didn't give me or something like that. It was overcompensating where it wasn't big enough. Nothing was ever good enough for me. So that's how, but now that I look back on it, I can see, wow, you really, you know, like talking to my younger self, you should be proud of yourself. You know, you should be proud of yourself. You did really cool work. You have integrity and you had integrity then. And that's how I guess I see it now. I'm very proud of it. And it was like magic to say that, you know, someone that came out of his car, you know, I promoted an event from the middle of the woods of Minnesota in Los Angeles, and it was packed. It was a sellout event. And people told me it would never happen. People from LA said, you're really in an uphill battle. And for me as a young kid, I was like, there is no such thing as an uphill battle for me. I'm on top of the mountain, baby. I'm fucking doing this. I'm dominant. I'm going to smash my hammer down, and it will happen. Wham!
I'm
But now
thinking
I'm a
off
little
the top of
jaded.
my head all of the promoters who were around in 2006, and they all were pretty aggressive. So I think I know what people meant, but still, good on you for booking something at Zen Sushi on. This was a Saturday, wasn't it?
Oh, I can't remember. It might have been a Thursday,
Okay.
for all I know.
That's
I
still a
think
peak day for clubs in LA. Like alternative clubs, Thursday was always an it day, and then everyone went to Bar Sinister on Saturday unless there was a bondage ball in town. Because you can either go to the bondage ball and either get felped out, creeped out, have a good time, and spend money on an expensive drink, or you can go to the Bar Sinister where goths go to die.
I I just know I was really happy. But that was also, it was a historic event within Satanism, because that was the event where the Church of Satan split down the middle. And Stephen Leba performed. And I remember Stephen Kasner was performing with Stephen. He was playing keyboard. And he was going to be at Stanton LaVey's wedding the next day. And the Church of Satan was having an event the next day. So like Stephen Leba was going to go to the Church of Satan event. I shunned the church. I got in a fight with the Church of Satan, and I did my event. And so at that point, my event was the place where everyone came to complain about it, to complain about the Church of Satan and what they were doing and how they were treating Stanton LaVey. And so I remember Leba got up on stage. We were talking, and I'm like, yeah, well, I'm not a follower. And he's like, but they're your leader. And I have no leader. And Stephen Leba gets up on the stage, follow your satanic leader. Follow your satanic leader. And we're talking, and we talk about doing this curse against the Church of Satan and everything, all this kind of political do what we say, or you're going to be shunned. So we were the bold people that were like, yeah, well, fucking shun us. We knew LaVey, fuck you. All of us were friends with Anton LaVey. And so we had a great fuck you attitude, a great fucking time. And I remember Jack Malebranche. I don't know what he goes by now. He goes by a different name, I think. But I think he writes a lot of gay books on being a alpha gay, alpha male and gay.
Okay.
Like a strong male gay. I'm not really sure. But Jack was there, and I remember him arguing on the Church of Satan board as people were like, fuck this event. He was confused, and he's like, what did they do? What did Shane do wrong? He had a good time. Look at this picture of him smeared with cake. He presented this picture. He's like, he had a good time. He made money, and he did this stuff. Why is everyone upset? But people were up in arms about it. They were like, you're no longer welcome in the Church of Satan. And none of us cared. And Stanton LaVey went on to get married and divorced, and it just changed. Everything changed. And I remember Stephen Leba making fun of people at the Church of Satan event. You all look the same. You're all dressed in fedoras. You're all, got your Betty Page haircuts. And he wore a white suit because they were all dressed in black. So he wore all white to go to it. And he mocked the whole thing. And we mocked everything they were doing. And looking back, I think it was cool. It was neat. Fuck
Even
them.
this is full circle. Look at how we've talked about TST. Look how we've talked about Peter and Peggy. Let's look at all of this. Look at Reddit. And
I don't know anything about it.
Just the internet in general. You say anything, you have to follow your leader.
Yeah. Well, I don't. And it's a rough life when you don't follow your leader. I was, I don't have a regret about it. I have a regret about how society is and how unfulfilled most people must be when they follow things like that. It's cool to collaborate. I like when young people say, we're collabing. They don't say I hired an illustrator. They say we're collabing. And I like that concept of collaboration. There's no following. There's no person above you. It's eye to eye. And coming from Chicago and eye to eye culture, I really think that's a proper way to look at things. We're collabing. It's not a follower leader kind of situation. We're just collabing in the moment. I'm who I am. You're who you are. You're great at that. I could use your help. You want to collab? And you're like, yeah, well, I need some money to do that. Great. But it's still considered a collab. At least that's what I pick up from younger people. And I appreciate that.
I think that how 666 Eve became a bull session for some of the COS is something that history is starting to repeat itself now. I can't help but feel like there's going to be far more bull sessions in the next 6 months.
Good.
And I can't help but feel like we help. Fuck, I kind of wish that Steve Labo was here right now to yell stuff with me.
He's a funny one.
I don't know him personally, but do you know what I know him from? Because I'm not as familiar with him as he did the Nestle death curse a few years ago. And my friend's troupe, AMF, who does the hook suspensions and stuff with the German artist Louis Fleischauer. Louis Fleischauer and a few people from that troupe are people I know quite well. And Leba was part of that, and so I heard Leba's name a lot during that time period that event took place. I saw lots of pictures of, that event, and it made me feel a lot of closure that satanic art is still alive and well, and it's not all just stained glass pictures of Baphomet.
Oh no, it's growing. It's just starting. Leba's a great. So me and Leba we had a great friendship. We collaborated on the Coyote Church. I was the first member of the Coyote Church, just like I was the first person in the Satanic Temple. So it's another thing. And he has a whole definition of me. Shane, I think there's a definition of Bugbee. I think it's something like I argue about things we agree on. So I'll argue, and basically we get to the end of this argument over days, and it's like basically we're saying the same thing, but I argue.
Oh no, we do this a lot too.
Okay.
And so I feel like yes, that is a Bugbee.
That's what Leba calls a Shane or Bugbee. It's in the Coyote Bible. But we had a great friendship for a great time. Steven taught me how to paint, and I really appreciate him. He's a great artist. I think personally he stopped evolving as an artist because he's afraid of what's next, what he has to show next. But I still have nothing but love for the guy. And I recently spoke with him about this podcast and stuff like that. And we had a moment together. We don't talk at this moment. He's a great artist. It's, it's too bad he doesn't get more, it's too bad either of us, both of us don't get more credit for what we've done.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe and tune into our next episode, wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. You can find us at Speak of the Devil Pod on Twitter and contact us at speakofthedevilpod@gmail.com. For Shane's artwork or to support his endeavors, please visit ShaneBugby.com or find him on Twitter at ShaneBugby. I've been Nannerl. Have a good one.
Oh, and ShaneIsTheDevil.com.